Welcome to the Survivors to Thrivers podcast. I am your host, Joshua Blattman. Today's guest is finishing a PhD dissertation titled The Social Life of Traumatic Brain Injury. One of the most fascinating things I've learned in this interview is that the societal effects of TBI are not just my intuition, but are demonstrated in his data across all sets of society. Allow me to introduce TBI survivor and PhD candidate in medical anthropology, Austin Wiley Duncan. Austin Wiley Duncan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Maybe we can start off this 20-minute conversation with a little check-in.
Okay.
How you doing? Where are you at? What brings you to now?
Well, what brings me to now is, my work is progressing pretty well, but you know what? I really didn't sleep well last night. Mm-hmm. This happens to me all the time. Mm-hmm. When I get things on my mind, I wake up in the middle of the night and I just start ruminating about it, and it goes over and over in my head, and I cannot go back to sleep. So I might have slept for 2 or 3 hours last night. I'm on a new sleep medication that has been working for me till now, but it didn't work last night. So I'm pretty tired today. And it's not the tiredness where I feel like I'm really going to fall asleep. It's the tiredness, it's a weariness, where I just don't feel totally present.
Weariness. Gotcha. Maybe you could tell me a little about your brain injury.
Okay. So the reason that I have problems sleeping, and have for the last 15 years, is that in 2003 I was doing a Fulbright grant studying Sharia and social change.
What?
Sharia.
What's that?
Islamic law, for lack of a better term.
Sharia law.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But the war on Iraq happened, and the State Department, who funds the Fulbright, told me to leave for the war because that's where they launched it from, was Kuwait. So I went to Egypt, to Al-Azhar Mosque and University, to continue my research. And while I was showing a friend who was doing his Fulbright in Germany, around in the southern city of Luxor, where the Valley of the Kings is, as I was crossing the street, a tourist bus did not see me and drove right through me.
Wow.
The mirror on the side of the bus is what hit me, as opposed to the bus itself. Mm-hmm. I was knocked into 6 days of spontaneous coma, and then about a month and a half of in and out of consciousness. Spent a couple of years in recovery at my parents' home. I got transferred, medevaced while still in the coma, to Harborview Hospital here in Seattle.
Wait, from the Middle East?
Yep. From Egypt.
Okay. It's a long flight.
Yes, but I was in a coma on the back of a British Air 747. So.
Wow.
All paid for by insurance, who disputed my claim for a couple of years till we finally won in court.
Oh my gosh.
Not that there was any money for me, because we didn't ever know who had actually done this.
Right.
Bus driver just got off scot-free. But then I tried to get back to my academic dreams, doing Arab and Islamic world anthropology, but just couldn't do it. Not because of emotional connection to what had happened, but because I didn't have the stamina to maintain an interest in that sort of thing that I didn't have any real personal connection to. I just had a real interest in it, but I was not, I've never been Muslim, I've traveled to the Middle East many times, but I don't have much more of a personal connection to it, besides the fact that I've been there and have lots of friends there. So after going to Cameroon and doing Peace Corps service and a master's degree there in NGO development, I decided to go back to anthropology and study brain injury.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And that's how I got to today.
So you had a brain injury, and now you're studying brain injury.
But I'm studying it from an angle that some people have studied it, but not much. And it's generally ignored by all manner of clinicians, because their worldview doesn't really accept for this kind of thing, which is the sociological, cultural angle of it. And so what I'm doing right now is studying what I call the social life of TBI, which is how TBI becomes real and present in our world, in our social and cultural life, through stories that are heard from individuals, but then also programs and policies that are imposed by the state or launched by NGOs and local service providers, and also the family members and friends of survivors themselves who understand what a TBI is, but don't necessarily understand everything about it in the ways that survivors and their caregivers can, at least the unique ways they can. And so we don't know anything about it. And so what I'm trying to do is say, okay, what's going on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you said we understand what TBI is, but then I'm like, wait, do we really understand it, or we just understand the words that mean?
And that's exactly why I'm trying to do the study, because we understand very well TBI. Very, very, very simple thing. You hit the brain by not actually hitting the brain, but by hitting the head.
Right, and the head hits the brain.
The head hits the brain.
Right.
The brain gets damaged.
Right.
Boom, TBI. Case solved. Nice, neat, simple, right?
Yeah.
Totally not right.
Welcome to your future.
It's completely not understood what that means in life.
Right. What's you're able to, they're able to discern a diagnosis, but they're not able to, I'm comparing digital versus analog.
Yeah.
And digital, they can discern what it is, but then, wait, what does the rest of my life mean from a qualitative standpoint?
Right. And also, because life is not the same thing as body, the life changes in many ways that have nothing to do with the body itself, but the body is always at the center of this life that's changing.
Sure.
And so how do you determine what this thing called brain injury is that happens to a body that is then lived as an actual experience in the life world for many years after that?
So qualitative versus quantitative.
And I'm thoroughly doing qualitative. In fact, ethnographic research is even on the far end of the qualitative research spectrum.
What is ethnographic? What does that mean?
It's anthropology's signature methodology, which is what a lot of other social science disciplines are doing now, which is basically to go and investigate something happening in the world without putting it in a laboratory or in a focus group, even though ironically I do use focus groups, or in the confines of a university or a library, which we're in right now. And so what I'm doing is conducting this ethnography of brain injury, not of a person, not of a group of people, but of a concept that is tied to a body, but is lived in real life circumstances in communities. And trying to say, okay, what exactly is going on?
Yeah.
Because there is no research on this.
How do we even understand the problem? Is what it sounds like you're saying. Yeah, that's fascinating. So you're a researcher, and you're doing anthropological, sociological. It's
okay. So what I do is anthropology, but let's be real for a second. The difference between anthropology and sociology, especially when it's done in the U.S., are very, very minimal.
Okay.
My sources are primarily, for theoretical sources, are primarily anthropological, but I also use a lot of sociology. In fact, one of my my co-chairs of my dissertation committee is a sociologist.
Let me take a step back here. We're already almost 9 minutes into this, and we've capped this at 20, and we could probably talk all day, but I want to get right into so you're doing all this research, you're collecting data. How many months and or years have you been doing this data research collection?
I proposed the study initially in 2014 as a project. It gradually morphed into my dissertation when on medical leave back here in Seattle in the fall of 2016. I actually had some time to really put these thoughts together. Then I proposed it, received a grant for it in 2017, came to the field in 2018 in January, and have been here doing this research ever since. So about 10 months now.
Okay. So you're collecting data. What ideas are being generated as you're collecting this data about TBI?
I'm really having to understand TBI as two different concepts.
Okay.
There's TBI, the injury.
Yeah.
And then there's TBI that is best described in a phrase, which is with TBI.
Oh. Okay.
So those two things are not the same thing.
Uh-huh.
When TBI is that momentary injury,
Uh-huh.
it happens once and has
Sure.
some sequelae. So it has some effects on the body. But living with TBI
Hold on a
is
second, just
something
let that
totally
pass.
different. Oh, sorry.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay, so you want me to repeat that?
So, yeah, if you wouldn't mind, thank you.
TBI
Yeah.
is that momentary injury and its various sequelae on its single individual brain and body.
Okay, hold on a second again. Sequela, I love that word. It's only been introduced to me recently. What does that mean?
Symptoms, essentially. It's
Symptoms.
like all the things that follow
Yeah.
from something
Right.
indicate that something has happened.
Cool.
Whereas living with TBI doesn't mean living with the symptoms. It doesn't mean living with the sequelae of the brain injury.
Uh-huh.
It means living with those and everyone's reaction to it, and the fact that you have all these problems that you've now adapted yourself to living with in a way that basically creates a big soup of an experience that is constantly changing and variable throughout your life and throughout every single social interaction that you have. And so my biggest concern right now is trying to disentangle these two things
Oh, you're
in
speaking my
such a
language when
way
you say disentangle.
that I can actually identify what it means to live with TBI in a way that is socially relevant for policymakers,
Right.
caregivers, and clinicians.
Yeah, that's huge. What are, again, so the ideas that are being generated as you're collecting this data, as you're observing people doing focus groups, people with TBI, and you're going like, you had this injury, what's your life like? What are those sequelae?
Totally depends on the person, and more importantly, totally depends on the person's circumstances,
Such as
such as
welfare, like
family members they live with. And this is
Okay.
the most important thing, the people right around them. Who are they? What are their relationships to the person? Then things like class, money, race, gender, age, all this is at play. Then things like location. Where exactly is that person living? And I'm using just one city as a way to, shrink my sample size. But even within this one city, I have informants who live as far out as Issaquah.
so we're in Seattle and Issaquah.
So it's like
Issaquah.
Seattle and environment, because
So,
they're all
yeah.
the people that come through the city of Seattle to interact with the TBI community as it is forming
Sure.
in a disjointed fashion here
So
in the city.
the broad metro
Yep.
of Seattle. Sure. What congruencies can you point to across all of those different
Not
disparate,
a single one.
which might be why they're having, which is why, I mean, I propose, maybe project that, like, maybe that's why it's been such a mysterious injury for such a long time?
That's definitely one of the reasons, because every single person is different. Think of it this way.
Yeah.
You're not injuring the brain. I mean, you are injuring the brain, right? But you're not just doing that. You're not just injuring the person. You're injuring every single thing that person and that brain are a part of.
The sense of self.
More than a sense of self, sense of family, sense of community, sense of neighborhood, sense of friendship group. So every single one of those things
Yeah.
has an impact on what living with TBI actually means. So when I go and I interview all of these different people, I realize there is no single thing that unites all of them, except for one.
Oh.
And that is the importance of their social networks in their life with TBI. So it's not a content that's shared by them. It's a way of being that is shared by them. The importance of all the people around them that they interact with. in both negative and positive ways, really defines what their life with TBI is like, more so than the injury itself.
Can you? There's too many quivers in the fire based on what can you expound?
Okay, so basically, what I found when I was first looking at the social life of TBI is that TBI as an injury is known. But what it means to live with TBI is not known. That thing comes to birth, comes into the world through all the social interactions that the person who has had a TBI has. So when I say the social life of TBI, I really mean the coming into being in a social world of TBI. The TBI comes to being, is born through social interactions. But I also mean the various social interactions that TBI survivors have. And what I found is there's nothing that's shared by all of them except for the importance of those social interactions in the survivors' lives.
Whew. So, before you wrote TBI the injury and TBI the phrase.
Yep. TBI with TBI the phrase.
With TBI the phrase. When we talked about this before, we talked about this as the social safety net and holes in the social safety net.
Yep.
There was a word that you said in the sentence before that I slipped in and slipped out because that happens. But let me just jump ahead and get into the holes in the social safety net.
Yeah.
Related to TBI. That's not related to like. 'Cause what I don't want to do is like. This guy tripped and fell, and so he has an excuse to be this way or that way, which.
That, I would say right there, is a conflation of the two terms, which is totally getting it wrong. They're saying TBI is the same as living with TBI.
Yeah.
They're not the same.
Help me disentangle that. Yeah, please. Go on.
So for that person you just said, he tripped and fell.
Yeah.
So he has various sequelae that are related to his tripping and falling. Mm-hmm. Maybe he has memory problems. Maybe he has emotional control problems. Maybe he has vision problems. Probably he might have some balance problems. Those probably will go away, but most people, when they hit their head, do have balance problems, even if only for an instant. That's not the same thing as what that person experiences going forward as they navigate life, having things like impacted memory or vision problems or attention deficit problems.
Yeah. In the Brain Injury Alliance circles, they talk about the quote-unquote new normal.
I find that phrase problematic.
I find that phrase angersome.
And I see no reason why you shouldn't.
Yeah. What do you do with that?
I think that's based on a misunderstanding of what life really is about.
Oh.
That there is something called normal.
Yeah.
It's just, so normal where it comes from is statistics.
Okay.
It's based on the bell curve.
Yeah.
And a certain part of that bell curve that is considered to be normal. Fits within this nice arc, therefore it's called normal. That doesn't mean that it's in any way, shape, or form like what we think of it as to mean, which is the right way things should happen. If, all things being equal, that scientific phrase, ceteris paribus.
I don't know that.
All things being equal.
Oh, okay.
Things will turn out a certain way. No, they won't. That's not what life is. That's not what the world is.
Right.
Everything happens its own way.
Uh-huh.
We are the ones. Society is what defines, what creates really what it thinks of as normal.
Defines and creates. Defines is good because defines.
Well, but defines means that
standardizes.
there is something there that is naming, but there's not really anything there. It's taking a whole mess of stuff and then drawing a line in the middle of it that's arbitrary, like borders on a map, for example.
Great
and
example,
saying, this stuff right in here, this is normal.
Right.
As if it was just waiting there to be discovered, when in fact it wasn't. It was created in the mind of that person who then drew the map around it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me of like the astronaut who was talking about how when you're in space, there are no lines
Yeah.
on the globe. It's just land and earth. Secondary circles. The social networks of TBI survivors, immediate family. How do you support somebody who's going through I assume for me, it's been an existential crisis. I assume that's a safe phrase to use for most people with the TBI,
I think
as they're trying to get to know themselves and who is in their bodies after a brain injury. But if they're looking for normal, if they're looking for a sense of homeostasis, and who they've been has been, the person that they've been, and then all the family has, and all the immediate social circle of that person, how does that social circle adapt to I hate the phrase, but I'm going to use it, new normal of that person?
Well, okay, first thing, there isn't a new normal for the person. The person is always changing, and so recovery doesn't go for a little period and then stop, and then that's it. Mm-hmm. We know in biomedical, so clinical circles, we've known for a long time that's not what actually happens. But the way it happens with most people I've talked to is that their friends just sort of flitter away.
Yeah, that happens.
There's usually a couple people that stick with them, not always. Some people lose everyone. And close family members, I'd say it's about 50-50, whether they stay or not.
Sure.
And the way that those family members or friends who stay in that person's social network stay,
Yeah.
just like with the individuals with brain injury,
Yeah.
totally particular. There's no single thing that's unified among all of them except for the way that they're in that person's life, which is they are adaptive.
So the secondary circles have to be adaptive.
Yes.
Meaning?
That there are certain ways to be with a person with a brain injury. And here I'm using the with, importantly, because I'm talking about with TBI now.
Sure.
That help that person. And there are certain ways that hurt that person, such as if a person is having problems with balance and muscle control and standing.
Okay.
There are times when it's good to push that person to stand more so that person's body will learn to adapt so that they can suddenly stand on their own and then maybe even walk on their own. There are times when you should not do that because pushing that person might actually make them fall and hit their head again, which could be much more significant than their first brain injury.
Yeah.
So in other words, you have to know, and there's never any absolute surety, so you have to have a pretty good guess that if you're going to push that person to stand on their own unaided, it's not going to hurt them. That's what the person who is in that person's brain, who's living with TBI, the person who is living with someone who is with TBI needs to be able to do. And people that I've talked to who have successful relationships that are thriving after their brain injuries, that is exactly what I've found.
Like the secondary circles need to have a sense of responsibility for the safety net that they hold for that person?
Usually.
Okay.
Not always. There are some people that I've met who they're thriving because the people who are in their safety net don't treat them like someone with a brain injury. They're not necessarily being adaptive because that's what that person needs.
Sure. So everybody needs something different.
What was the friends and the family that were there earlier had to adapt to be at that point when that person didn't need them to help him or her anymore.
Gotcha. Okay, so we're over 20 minutes,
Yep.
and I want to appreciate what the listeners for hanging on. I also really, really wanted to disentangle or bring up TBI and homelessness.
Yes.
Because that feels like it's just like such a big deal.
It's a huge deal.
Yeah. Maybe you could give me a couple sentences about that.
Sure. So TBI and homelessness is exactly related to what I call living with TBI. And it's related to the social life of TBI.
And how life falls apart.
Because your
and the
life
sequelae,
only falls apart
Yeah.
if your social interactions fall apart.
Right.
Such as a social interaction like having to pay for your rent. That is a social interaction. So you're not dropping coins in a box. You're usually writing a check and turning it over to someone who then takes the check and looks at it and deposits it.
Sure.
That's a social interaction. Even though it's a monetary interaction, it's still a social interaction.
Sure.
If that breaks down, such as you forget to pay your rent,
Right.
and it's the first time, and your person who's your landlord says, no, that's it, you're out.
Right.
All of a sudden you're homeless. What if you can't find another place that's close enough to where you need to be
Right.
for access to medical services or work
Oh
or
my
something
God.
else?
Oh my God, that's so
All of a
stressful.
sudden, you don't have anywhere to live. You might become homeless. And I'm not talking about the chronic homeless here.
Right. Right.
This is people who
are
are transitorily homeless.
Right.
All of a sudden, and I know several people who in the TBI community who have done this.
Yeah.
They're homeless because of the social life of TBI, because they forgot. And the other person wasn't there to accept that they were going to forget because of their TBI and then let them forget.
Right.
They're not going to be the person that person needs in their life at that point, and all of a sudden they're homeless.
Yeah. Wow. Austin, there's so much more that we could talk about, but with respect to time.
And
Anything
the
else?
fact that I'm still doing this research, so.
Yeah. Any last words?
Research is still ongoing. I will finish it in about a year and a half, but I will probably continue writing on this for many years to come.
Well, thank you so much for spending your time with me today, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Hopefully, it was a pleasure.